Kaiser's Legion is an autocratic, ultra-reactionary, totalitarian slaver society founded in 2247 by Edward Sallow, also known as Kaiser, and Joshua Graham, and based on the ancient Roman Empire. Its legionnaires are well-organized, culturally insular fighting force that mainly operate east of the Colorado River and the Grand Canyon, in the former state of Arizona. Ever pushing east, their capital is the city of Flagstaff. Kaiser's Legion is comprised mostly of reconditioned tribes and their descendants. The Legion symbol is a golden bull on a red field, which is derived from Julius Caesar's standard for the 10th Twin Legion. In the year 2246, the followers of the Apocalypse sent a group of 9 members to the Arizona wastelands to study the region's tribal languages. The group included follower Edward Sallow, who met up with the new Canaanite missionary Joshua Graham, and specialist in tribal dialects. Not long into their travels, the group was captured by the Blackfoot tribe and held for ransom. At the time, the tribe warred against 7 other tribes and suffered from a lack of skill in warfare. Against his companion's wishes, Sallow aided the Blackfoots to save them and his companion from their captors' enemies, giving them knowledge in gun maintenance, small unit tactics, explosive improvisation, and military strategy. The tribals admired Sallow so much that they made him their leader. With that, Sallow took the name Kaiser and began reorganizing the tribals he commanded into the Legion. Kaiser established warfare policies in the Legion based on the concepts of divide and conquer and total war. The Legion defeated the region's 7 tribes from weakest to strongest and completely dominated each faction's land and people. The people conquered in campaigns were conscripted, enslaved, or killed. Kaiser saw the tribes as playing at war. The tribals viewed his tactics as foreign, as their warfare consisted of skirmishes that never escalated into major conflicts. With the combined leadership of Kaiser and Graham, declared the Malpais Legat, the Legion led campaigns against more tribes, forming a fanatically loyal army with their captives. 86 tribes had been conquered by the year 2271, and the territory Kaiser led formed the most powerful society east of the Colorado River. The Legion expanded west into the Mojave and established Fortification Hill on the Colorado River in 2277. The advancing forces eventually made contact with the NCR near New Vegas and began a campaign to take the region. Under the command of Malpais Legat, the Legion forces marched against the new California Republic garrison at Hoover Dam in an attempt to take the strategic asset and river crossing in what became known as the First Battle of Hoover Dam. The Malpais Legat initially had the upper hand. Legat was able to push the NCR defenders back and led his forces over the dam. Lead elements of the NCR, including members of the 1st Recon Battalion and NCR Rangers, executed a tactical retreat across the dam and into Boulder City, all the while using their marksmanship prowess to kill the Legion forces, primarily Centurions and Decani. Legat, unable to adapt his strategies in combat or see the deception unfolding in front of him, chose to order his legionnaires to push the Rangers, not knowing the NCR booby-trapped Boulder City, packing C4 along their lines of retreat and within the city itself and drawing the Legion into a trap. When the Legion forces entered the city, the NCR detonated the explosives and inflicted several casualties amongst them, crippling their offensive. The NCR forces then counterattacked, pushing back and eventually routing the Legion forces, who fled east back over the dam. Kaiser, angered at the failure of his Legat, made an example of him. The Praetorian Guard covered the Legat in pitch, set him on fire, and cast him into the depths of the Grand Canyon. Kaiser forbade the mention of his name, and now he is spoken of only in hushed whispers by the lowest legionnaires and slaves. They call him the Burned Man. By 2281, Kaiser's Legion had re-established its power in the west, rebuilt its army, and slowly encroached on the city of New Vegas. They continued to contest NCR over all of the region, destroying several NCR bases, such as the Ranger Station Charlie and Camp Searchlight, overrunning the NCR town of Nelson, and creating unease and terror across the region. Sometime before the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, Kaiser's Legion had conquered a new tribe under the command of Centurion Gaius Magnus, bringing the number to 87. From my investigation into Kaiser's Legion, I have come to the conclusion that it is meant as an analogy for the Soviet Union. When looking at Kaiser's Legion and how it is structured, the way they behave, and even the way that Kaiser himself speaks, we see a great quote-unquote similarity to the Soviet Union. However, I believe that it is not just an analogy for the Soviet Union, but an analogy of what the capitalist class thinks the Soviet Union was. It is my belief that the developers of Fallout New Vegas intended to build Kaiser's Legion off of what the bourgeois wants people to think of the Soviet Union. In other words, I think the game in this respect mirrors some of the worst anti-Soviet Cold War propaganda. Here I will lay out a compelling argument for why I think this is so. Socialism and the Soviet Union were predicated on the idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat, a theory most greatly developed by Soviet leader Lenin, but started with Marx, holds that there is a period between capitalism and communism called socialism. During that time, the working class holds state power, which it uses to oppress and eventually eliminate the capitalist class. While it is doing this, it is also laying down the means by which to transform people from the capitalist life mentality to the communist one, the new man, as Che Guevara put it. By mentality, I mean the social consciousness, the way in which people perceive and relate to each other in society. It is primarily determined by the material conditions in which people exist. The feudal era created a feudal social consciousness, the right to own peasants and land, and the church to back up the idea that the king had a divine right to rule. Capitalism, hunter-gatherer society, communism, and Neanderthal times were no different in this regard. All societies have had a socially constructed social consciousness and human nature. Yes, human nature is not set in stone as one particular way that cannot be altered. No medical professional in the psychiatric field would agree that people are only one way. If you believe that human nature is the same way as it was in the tribal society and caveman times to now, you are horribly deluded. The Communist Party takes a hold of the government to begin the transformation of society. This process is carried out by changing the economic relations between people, which determine these social relations. Communes for agricultural production are constructed, eliminating the divide between landlords and peasants who work the land. That exploitative relationship ceases to exist. One man is not an owner and the other his subordinate employee. They are both on the same level and see each other as equals and having equal say in production. The same goes for industrial production as well. The idea is to gradually eliminate all class divisions until we are on the same level. We are all proletariat, which culminates in the abolishment of classes. There is no magical, instantaneous transformation from capitalism to communism overnight, as anarchists would have us believe. Human nature and social consciousness needs to go through a transformation process. Despite the claims made by many anarcho-communists, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels did in fact propound the idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat. They did not use this name, but it does match closely with what Lenin put forward, and what they describe is very similar to it. However, it was less developed than what Lenin gave us. I will show this by giving the following quotes by both of them. Between the capitalist and communist society, there lies the period of the revolutionary transformation of one into the other. Corresponding to this is also a political transition period in which the state can be nothing but the revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat. Moving in class antagonisms, society up to now had need of the state, that is, an organization of the exploiting class at each period of the maintenance of its external conditions of production, that is, particularly for the forcible holding down of the exploited class in the conditions of oppression, slavery, lineage, serfdom, wage labor, given by the existing mode of production. As soon as there is no social class to be held in subjugation any longer, as soon as class domination and the struggle for individual existence based on the anarchy of production existing up to now are eliminated together with the collisions and excesses rising from them, there is nothing more to repress, nothing necessitating a special repressive force, a state. The first act in which the state really comes forward as the representative of the whole of society, the taking of possession of the means of production in the name of society, is at the same time its last independent act as a state. The interference of the state power in social relations becomes superfluous in one sphere after another, and then dies away of itself. The government of persons is replaced by the administration of things and the direction of the process of production. The state is not abolished. It withers away. The dictatorship of the proletariat is the working class state which oversees the transformation of society from capitalism to communism. By state is meant a special repressive force. It withers away as repression becomes gradually unnecessary. Scientific socialism is based on a correct understanding of material conditions and how they shape us and our society. And the revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat, anything less than this, is either anti-scientific utopian in the case of anarchism, or inherently reactionary in the preservation of the capitalist class, as is the case with social democracy. This idea of a dictatorship of the working class is for some reason very difficult for anti-communists to grasp. They merely see the word dictatorship and assume nothing but the most vilest attributes of Hitler, Mussolini, and other monsters. Lenin advocated democratic centralism, a principle that brings democracy and meaningful action to the operation and transformation of society. Democratic centralism is an organizational method applied by the Bolsheviks in the making of the Russian Revolution, democracy in discussion, centralism in action, within a strategy of building a vanguard party. The concept was first elaborated by Lenin in his fight for centralism and against the circle mentality of the Russian revolutionaries prior to the formation of the RSDOP and the Bolsheviks in 1901, but the term only came into general use around 1917. The organizational method with which Lenin built the Bolshevik Party was adapted from the past successes and failures of the working class movement to the specific conditions of pre-World War I Russia. Trade unions, for example, put leadership proposals to a vote at mass meetings and then used the picket lines to enforce a majority decision. The rules of the Communist League and the International Working Men's Association of Marx's day are based on the same general principles. However, it was Lenin who coined the term and developed the principles of a disciplined mass working class political party. There are three interrelated aspects of democratic centralism: the definition of membership, proletarian or participatory democracy, and unity in action. The definition of membership. Different organizations have different concepts of membership. A small group of soldiers behind enemy lines has a very strict understanding of who they are, and as a result, a very tight concept of the rights and obligations of each other, their members of a broad social movement. On the other hand, it has only a vague concept of membership and its members only a limited commitment. Lenin elaborated the principles of democratic centralism in relation to a working class political party operating under conditions of illegality and consequently insisted on a very clear criterion of membership: agreement with the party's program and the obligation to work under the direction of one of its organizations. Clearly, the rights and obligations of members differ according to the criterion of membership. On the other hand, whether the organization is a trade union, a social movement, or a secret party cell, the rights and obligations of members, whether greater or less, must be in balance. Proletarian or participatory democracy. The principles of proletarian democracy were given their most objective demonstration in the Paris Commune, as described by Lenin in his State and Revolution. Proletarian democracy implies the widest, most democratic, most exhaustive discussion prior to any decision, and emphasizes the right of people to determine their own activity, and opposes the separation of legislative and executive branches, i.e. the division of labor between administration and labor, theory and practice. Consequently, democratic centralism implies that an organization ought to be so structured as to provide the capacity of any part of the organization to participate in determining policies relevant to their own responsibilities. Unity in action. Unity is a fundamental question of survival for the working class, but it is in the nature of an oppressed class that it is to emancipate itself. Unity cannot be achieved by orders from above, but it can only be based on agreement and commitment achieved by the means of proletarian democracy among members whose commitment to the organization is constant with their rights within it. When a policy has been determined by means of protracted and thoroughgoing discussion amongst those who must carry it out, then unity in action is easily achieved. However, action inevitably implies unforeseen obstacles and changes which require an instant and coordinated response. It is inescapable that effective coordination in action presupposes leadership, which is obeyed without question. Consequently, unity in action necessarily involves an acceptance of leadership. It is this problem which has been the source of most pain and controversy in the history of the workers' movement. See the early chapters of Lenin's Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. The balance between centralism and democracy. A small group of soldiers under enemy fire would be ill-advised to subject their tactics to thoroughgoing discussion. Total centralization is the best policy, with one of their number assuming the responsibility to key instructions. On the other hand, a trade union deciding whether or not to accept the boss's offer or continue the strike can and must take as long as necessary to ensure that every member of the strike is in agreement on what to do. Consensus decision-making is the order of the day, and leaders should take a back seat. Thus, the balance between democracy and centralism must move according to circumstances. Too much democracy in action leads to disorganization and confusion, and usually defeat. Too much centralism in discussion leads to bureaucratism, bad decisions, and a loss of commitment amongst members. In the view of the bourgeoisie, the Soviet Union was nothing like this. They claim an absolute dictatorship under Stalin without even the knowledge that he wasn't the absolute head of the nation. Caesar's Legion is set up in the way they think the Soviet Union was like: autocratic, ultra-reactionary, totalitarian slaver society. They simply deny the groundbreaking forms of participatory democracy that were created. They see the Soviet Union as an Orwellian fiction, a terrible boogeyman that didn't exist, until it became real in America after the events of September 11th, 2001. This theme of delusional misrepresentation continues. Let us compare the origins first of the Kaiser and then Joseph Stalin. Edward Sallow was born in 2226 as an NCR citizen. When he was 2 years old, he and his mother fled the boneyard when raiders killed his father, eventually finding sanctuary with the followers of the Apocalypse in 2231. He received a free education from the followers and eventually became a scribe, specializing in anthropology and linguistics. Though he was intelligent and charismatic, the narcissistic and petulant Edward was never very popular among his peers. He did not feel like he belonged among the followers and, in hindsight, considered their goals to be utterly naive. In 2246, at the age of 20, Sallow and fellow follower Bill Calhoun and 7 others were sent to the East to study tribal dialects. He was instructed to meet with Joshua Graham, a Mormon missionary and tribal specialist from New Canaan. They embarked on a journey to the region known formerly as Arizona as a part of a 9-person expedition. Disgusted by the primitive conditions in which the tribals lived, he looked down upon them as inferior and immoral. During this expedition, they discovered a cache of books about ancient Rome. While he knew some basic facts about ancient history, these books shed new light on some details. Reading first the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, then Julius Caesar's own commentary, and personal accounts of his military conquests, these changed his life and were the starting point for his grand plan. Some point in 2247, Sallow, Graham, Calhoun, and others became hostages of the Blackfoot tribe, While Sallow believed the tribe did this for ransom, Graham would later attribute the change in the tribe's relationship with the party to a mistranslation. At the time, the tribe was at war with 7 other tribes, and they were heavily outnumbered, and Sallow recognized their defeat and subsequent demise was only a matter of time. Unwilling to be destroyed along with them, Sallow chose, against the wishes of his companions, to use his knowledge to train the Blackfoot tribe in the art of warfare after witnessing their lack of knowledge firsthand. He showed them how to clean and maintain guns, operate with small unit tactics, manufacture explosives, and to strike at their weakest enemies first, divat et imperia, or divide and conquer. He quickly impressed them enough to the point where he was made their leader, taking upon himself the name Kaiser. Kaiser introduced the tribe to the concept of total war against the tribes around them. Sallow knew that even though the tribes had always fought each other via occasional skirmishes, he considered them to only be playing war, having never seen warfare at its most destructive and barbaric state. They defeated the weakest of their enemies first and enslaved many of the able-bodied survivors. But Sallow had the rest, including the women and children, killed to the last, leaving their remains piled high. When Sallow surrounded the next of the Blackfoot tribe's foes, they refused to surrender. Sallow brought an emissary of the tribe back to witness the fate of the first tribe. The tribe surrendered rather than suffer the same fate. The concept of total war was an entirely new and terrifying type of conflict that the tribes had never encountered before. Such brutality would form the core of the Legion's tactics and philosophy. Surprisingly, Joshua Graham decided to join Sallow as his right-hand man, in time becoming known as Malpius Legat. While Calhoun was sent back to the followers to inform them of what he was doing, the other 6 members of the expedition were murdered on the self-proclaimed emperor's orders. The newly christened Kaiser formed his legion out of the tribes that had either been conquered or had been chosen to capitulate to avoid total destruction. He used the commentary as a blueprint. After all, which illiterate tribal would know that he was not the original Kaiser, and his Rome was merely a copy of the civilization long gone? Kaiser chose the concept of the Roman Empire as a model for the Legion because of its parallels to what he considered the status quo of post-apocalyptic world. He believed the concept of individualism had no place in facing challenges of the wasteland. Ideologically, the Roman Empire was also appealed to him for its ability to assimilate those it conquered. The destruction of tribal identities was a key part of the Legion's long-term strategy for unification. He intended to erase their individual identities and replace them all with a single monolithic culture. The Legion, where individuals have no value outside of what they can offer the greater whole. By 2250, the Kaiser had declared himself the son of Mars, Roman god of war, and 5 years later he established his first capital in the ruins of Flagstaff. By 2274, he had conquered most of the tribes of northern Arizona, southwestern Colorado, western New Mexico, and eastern Utah, and became known as the conqueror of the 86 tribes, whose legion had never met any serious defeat until their confrontation with the NCR at the First Battle of Hoover Dam. Stalin was born Los Besariones de Jugoslavia on the 18th of December, 1878, in the town of Gori, Tiflis Governorate, Russian Empire, or what is known today as Georgia. His mother, Ketivan Glades, and his father, Bessarion Jugashvili, worked as a cobbler. As a child, he was plagued with numerous health issues. He was born with 2 adjoined toes on his left foot. His face was permanently scarred by smallpox at the age of 7. At 12, he injured his left arm in an accident involving a horse-drawn carriage, rendering it shorter and stiffer than his counterpart. Milos's father slid into alcoholism, which made him abusive to his family and caused his business to fail. When Milos's mother enrolled him in Greek Orthodox priesthood school against her husband's wishes, his enraged father went on a drunken rampage. He was banished from Gori for assaulting its police chief. He subsequently moved from Tiflis, or Tbilisi today, leaving his family behind. When Stalin was 16, he received a scholarship to attend the Georgian Orthodox Tbilisi Seminary, spiritual seminary. Although his performance had been good, he was expelled in 1899 after missing his final exams. The seminary records also suggest that he was unable to pay his tuition fees. Around this time, Stalin discovered the writings of Vladimir Lenin and joined the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, a Marxist group. Out of school, Stalin briefly worked as a part-time clerk in a meteorological office. But after a state cracked on revolutionaries, he went underground and became a full-time revolutionary living off donations. When Lenin formed the Bolsheviks, Stalin eagerly joined up with him. Stalin proved to be a very effective organizer of men as well as a capable intellectual. Among other activities, he distributed propaganda, provoked strikes, staged bank robberies, and ordered assassinations. In 1907, Stalin made use of his reputation as a poet to stage the 1907 Tbilisi bank robbery. He used his former school friend, who was also a fan of his poetry, and the inside man for the bank robbery that left 40 dead and stole millions of rubles for Lenin. This demonstrated to Lenin his need for Stalin. Stalin was arrested and exiled to Siberia numerous times, but often escaped. His skill and charm won him the respect of Lenin and rapidly rose through the ranks of the Bolsheviks. The Kaiser claims to be holding a huge vision for humanity that he is bringing, a transformation of the world based on particular principles via the violent overthrow of those who oppose it. In reality, he has nothing more than a personality cult built off of some divine right to rule. The Legion follows the cult of Mars, created by Kaiser in 2250 after claiming he was the son of Mars. Members of the Legion believed that the war god cleansed the earth with fire so that Kaiser could conquer the earth and save it from chaos. Most members of the Legion are oblivious to their society's basis in ancient Roman culture and believe that their customs were dictated by Kaiser by Mars himself. Whatever these principles are, it seems that only Kaiser and a few commanders actually understand what they are. For everyone else, it is merely a prejudiced view that sees all those outside the Legion as subhuman vermin. Isn't this what anti-communists think of the Soviet Union? They claim Stalin and Lenin were power-mad tyrants who held power by a cult of personality and brutal oppression, an accusation which is primarily leveled at Stalin. They don't believe in what Marxism stands for, so therefore it must be all about Stalin, never the Marxist ideas, or even the ideas Stalin contributed. In their minds, communism is a cult/philosophy/religion that sees all of humanity united under the control of one man, kind of like Christianity. They deny the democratic institutions built in and instead see only their own hate-fueled illusions drift into them by their own ruling class ideology. The irony here is the fact that they miss their own actual blind faith, the self-indulgent cult of the self, which tells them constantly that they are so great and no one can understand them. They are great men whom lesser beings, everyone else, will simply drag down. To them, the concept of using productive forces of society to benefit everyone is a mad cult. It is the slavery of the individual to the state, and the state is the slave master. They're crying this while they go into work, which is a dictatorship, every day to be used for someone else's benefit. They understand nothing of the desire to build a better world, free from the dictatorship of capital they bow to. Interactions between people must be exchanges of products. Human beings are only buyers and sellers. The inhumanity and alienation of reducing human interaction to sales and the workplace is beyond the limits of their own internal self-glorification. Stalin and other socialist leaders have been accused of having a cult of personality. This accusation is represented in the Kaiser. In substance, Kaiser's Legion is a cult of personality around him, and not the ideals for which he and they stand. This mirrors perfectly the bourgeois accusation of Stalin, that he is worshipped above and beyond the ideas of communism, a better world, sharing, and universal brotherhood. Since at least I feel Kaiser's Legion and the Soviet Union are being compared, I feel the need to explain the difference. As I said before, the Legion is in form, based off of certain principles, but is in reality a cult of personality around the Kaiser. The same is believed of the Soviet Union under Stalin. Of course, even a cursory glance can tell you that this is a fraud. However, since I do believe that the Legion is an analogy for the Soviet Union, I should explain the differences. Kaiser leads in totality, with all others in various levels of subordination. Stalin, however, was the chairman of the Central Committee, which required votes from that same committee in order for anything to get done. But aside from this, how are these two ideologies different in substance? For the Kaiser, it is one of blatant religion. The weakened state of humankind following the atomic blast offers an opportunity to unite the world under one flag. By using brutal and militaristic tactics, the Legion seeks to exploit that weakness and establish one society united under Kaiser. Kaiser claims that the atomic bombs were sent by the god of war Mars just for this purpose. The ultimate goal of the Legion is to unite humanity. They see democratic societies as tools that the rich and powerful use to keep the majority of humanity in a state of constant irresponsibility and ignorance. By keeping people addicted to consumerism, they could effectively drain citizens of their wealth while rendering them ineffective. This not only partially explains the Legion's disdain of alcohol and chemical stimulants, as well as pointless luxuries. It also explains why they see the majority of people as animals, and are so quick to use violence against them. To them, animals are any creatures that live only to survive. Humanity, in their eyes, is defined instead by the ability to override the fear of death and the base instinct to survive. Those who are more able to face death head-on can more easily sacrifice themselves in pursuit of the greater societal and ideological goal. Kaiser greatly dislikes democratic societies, particularly the NCR, because of their glorification of the wealthy over the worthy. In addition, Kaiser greatly dislikes sectionalism and consumerism, mainly because he believes they convert humans into animals, or simple beings that live only for the sake of surviving. Kaiser believes that it is his opportunity and destiny to unite all of humankind under one banner, ushering in an age where each human is judged by their merit, and are subsequently given power according to that perceived virtue. This way of thinking exemplifies the differences between the NCR and Kaiser's Legion. The NCR believe that basic democratic mercantilism will eventually bring peace to the wastes. While the greedy may rule now, eventually, when peace and stability arrive, the populace will eventually acquire greater power through reform. Kaiser, however, sees that as a curse, not a blessing. In his mind, it will allow humans/animals to be preyed upon by the greedy. While the NCR uses their significant wealth to fund research to improve the average life expectancy of its citizens, the Legion believes that longer lives come at the cost of other humans, resources, and purpose. People who blindly try to extend their lives should instead attempt to live without the fear of death hanging over them. This is why the Legion refuses to use medical services except in rare cases. Given how little common ground exists between the ideologies of the NCR and the Legion, these factions will undoubtedly contest each other until one is defeated. The idea of Marxism could not be any more different. Marxism sees the world through dialectical materialism. Dialectical materialism is a philosophy that seeks to explain the world in a way that previous modes of thinking were unable to accomplish. Both idealism and metaphysical materialism cannot bring us to rational scientific conclusions about reality and our interaction with it. Both of these philosophies cannot give us an analysis of our world that allows us to be able to understand our world and how it interacts, reflects upon us, and how we reflect upon it. Both of these views eliminate the genuine ability we have to alter how the world is, because they fail to account for our interaction with it. What we need is an understanding of the activity of our consciousness. If we cannot understand how we interact with the world around us, how can we ever understand how to change it? This question is left completely unanswered by both metaphysical materialism and idealism. The truth this brings us is that we are capable of changing the world around us. The other two modes are completely inadequate for this purpose. We see this in the ideologies that they represent. In right-wing ideology, metaphysical materialism is abundant. Matter determines consciousness. In right-wing ideology, you see that African Americans are poor, therefore they are naturally poor, and therefore must want to be poor. To put it another way, people are poor because that's the way they are. And Rand did say that a man's contributions to society can be measured by his wealth. So since poor people are not wealthy, it must mean they don't want to contribute. It's a belief that if something exists, that's the way it is, and that's it. On the other hand, we have idealism, which claims that consciousness determines matter. This pushes the idea that things are whatever we think they are. Our consciousness makes the world what it is. It is whatever we think it is. Others see it as our ideas shape the world and that material conditions don't have an effect on it. A good example of this is the Zeitgeist movement, which is basically just utopian socialism revisited. They believe that if we just get rid of capitalism and hand over everything to machines, society will just automatically get better. They literally give no analysis to how the transformation of people will take place. They think once capitalism is gone, change will spontaneously take place. They think once capitalism is gone, people will spontaneously have a new consciousness. Even their idea of how the end of capitalism will come is completely idealistic. They give us a scenario in the movies of how this will happen. People just en masse approach the banks and throw their money into a pile over rejecting capitalism. Then the bankers in the boardroom just give up, and capitalism comes to an end. It's like a light switch that will just flick and everyone will be transformed. This is completely idealistic and completely unrealistic. This question of utopian socialism was already addressed by Friedrich Engels in Socialism, Utopian and Scientific. Let me explain the difference by quoting Mao. Wherein lies the basic difference between idealism and materialism? It lies in the opposite answers given by the two to the fundamental question in philosophy, that of the relationship between spirit and matter, that of the relationship between consciousness and existence. Idealism considers spirit, consciousness, concepts, the subject, and the source of all that exists on earth, and matter, nature and society, the object, as secondary and subordinate. Materialism reorganizes the independent existence of matter as detached from spirit and considers the split as secondary and subordinate. This leaves us with the Marxist view of dialectical materialism that we use. Dialectical materialism offers from conventional deterministic materialism in that it rejects the view that objects are static and merely pass on their properties to structures of which they are a part, thereby leading some, such as Einstein, to deduce that if the motion of all matter were known from the outset of the universe, all things would be calculable. Every contour of the universe, every planet, as well as the makeup of all things and their precise times of development, etc. When using a Marxist view of the world, we see that all existing change in history has been a struggle between contending classes. This is the basis for the Communist Manifesto. The struggle between two classes gives birth to the new society. The bourgeois was a rising class that was in contradiction with the feudal landlord class, meaning the two contending classes had to battle to see which one would survive. In this, we see the tremendous difference in how Marxism is portrayed and how it actually is. Marxism is far from the totalitarian boogeyman that the bourgeois make it out to be. We scientifically see the world and they do not. They believe in blind faith of what is with no understanding, see their ideas on human nature. In fact, it would be fair to criticize liberals of this to an extent. They see what they want to change, but have no real basis for changing it. They detract from the material world in order to perceive what they want, as opposed to keeping it grounded in materialism to achieve it. Conservatives, on the other hand, do have the religious mentality. If it exists, then it must be. They have different ways of expressing this, such as, I'm just telling it like it is. They can only see what is. They cannot see why it is. To them, the most superficial expression of a phenomenon is all there is to it. This is why conservatism breeds religion, racism, homophobia, sexism, and all sorts of other societal ills. This is not to say that liberals are free from spreading such ideas. They can as well. The difference is quantitative. This is why we Marxists use dialectical materialism. We understand how the physical world and material conditions influence us, but we also understand how our consciousness gives us the ability to influence changes in the material world. In both Marxism and Kaiser's Legion, materialism is rejected. By this, I am referring to the worship of material possessions over ideas and self-improvement. Not in the philosophical sense where idealism is preferred. While they both oppose it, they do so for different reasons. The substance of the two different reasons speaks volumes about two entirely different ideologies. The bourgeois view of Marxist philosophy is, of course, a combination of ignorance and lies. Anti-materialism in the Legion sense is rather a religious idea because it supposes physical objects having supernatural power over people and an ability to pervert their thinking and create weak, decadent men while they respect power, honor, and strength. Marxism, however, has an entirely scientific view of this phenomenon. Marx called it the fetishism of commodities. In Marx's view, it is not the physical objects themselves that have power, but the relationships behind the production and distribution of these physical things, commodities, in society. Let us go into this in more detail. Kaiser greatly dislikes democratic societies, especially the NCR, because of their glorification of wealthy over the worthy. In addition, Kaiser greatly dislikes sectionalism and consumerism, mainly because he believes they convert human beings into animals, or simple beings that live only for the sake of surviving. In Kaiser's eyes, people become weak when they have too much pleasure. The great vision that he has for society, ideas of honor, etc., are forgotten about when people have possessions that they place above society. We see this theme throughout many religions, most notably Buddhism, which aspires to completely reject all materialism, including eventually the entire physical world. Of course, Kaiser is nowhere near as lofty as the Buddha. He has chosen a particular vision that he wants to uphold as the destiny, or the ultimate state of mankind. The traits he wants such a people to have are opposed by consumerism, by the worship of commodities. Once people become enamored in their possessions, they will forget all about combat skill, reading, writing, or learning new skills to better themselves. Certainly, we can see this has happened in the past as well as in our present society in real life. The mistake Kaiser makes is that he does not correctly identify the source of the problem. He believes them to be inherent to the commodities themselves. This is where he is wrong, and Marx is correct. In Karl Marx's critique of political economy of capitalism, commodity fetishism is the perception of the social relations involved in production, not as relationships among people, but as an economic relationship among the money and commodities exchanged in the market trade. As such, commodity fetishism transforms the subjective abstract aspect of economic value into objective real things that people believe have intrinsic value. The theory of commodity fetishism is presented in the first chapter of Capital, Critique of Political Economy, at the conclusion of the analysis of the value form of commodities, to explain that the social organization of labor is mediated through market exchange, the buying and selling of commodities, goods, and services. Hence, in a capitalist society and social relations between people, who makes what, who works for whom, the production time for a commodity, etc., are perceived as economic relations among objects, that is, how valuable a given commodity is when compared to another commodity. Therefore, the market exchange of commodities masks, it obscures, the true economic character of the human relations of production between the worker and the capitalist. As Marx said, a commodity appears at first sight a very trivial thing and easily understood. Its analysis shows that it is in reality a very queer thing, abounding in metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties. So far as it is of value in use, there is nothing mysterious about it, whether we consider it from the point of view that by its properties it is capable of satisfying human wants, or from the point that those properties are the product of human labor. It is clear as noonday that man, by his industry, changes the forms of the materials furnished by nature in such a way as to make them useful to him. The form of wood, for instance, is altered by making a table out of it, yet for all that, the table continues to be that common everyday thing, wood. But so soon as it steps forth as a commodity, it is changed into something transcendent. It not only stands with its feet on the ground, but In relation to all other commodities, it stands on its head and evolves out of its wooden brain grotesque ideas, far more wonderful than table turning ever was. The mystical character of commodities does not originate, therefore, in their use value, just as little does it proceed from the nature of determining factors of value. For, in the first place, however varied the useful kinds of labor or productive activities may be, it is a physiological fact that they are functions of the human organism, and that each such function, whatever may be its nature or form, is essentially the expenditure of human brain, nerves, muscles, etc. Secondly, with regard to that which forms the groundwork for the quantitative determination of value, namely, the duration of that expenditure, or the quantity of labor, it is quite clear that there is a palpable difference between its quantity and its quality. In all states of society, the labor time that it costs to produce the means of subsistence must necessarily be an object of interest to mankind, not of equal interest in different stages of development. And lastly, from the moment that men in any way work for one another, their labor assumes a social form. Whence then arises the enigmatical character of the product of labor, so soon as it assumes the form of commodities? Clearly from this form itself, the equality of all sorts of human labor is expressed objectively by their products all being equally values. The measure of the expenditure of labor power by the duration of that expenditure takes the form of the quantity of value of the products of labor, and finally the mutual relations of the producers, within which the social character of their labor affirms itself, takes the form of a social relation between products. A commodity is therefore a mysterious thing, simply because in it the social character of men's labor appears to them as an objective character stamped upon the product of that labor, because the relation of the producers to the sum total of their own labor is presented to them as a social relation existing not between themselves, but between the products of their labor. This is the reason why the products of labor become commodities, social things, whose qualities are at the same time perceptible and imperceptible by the senses. In the same way, the light from an object is perceived by us not as the subjective excitation of our optic nerve, but as the objective form of something outside the eye itself. But in the act of seeing, there is, at all events, an actual passage of light from one thing to another, from the external object to the eye. There is a physical relation between physical things, but it is difficult with commodities. There, the existence of the things called commodities and the value relation between the products of labor which stamps them as commodities have absolutely no connection with their physical properties and with their material relations arising therefrom. It is a definite social relation between men that assumes, in their eyes, the fantastic form of a relation between things. In order, therefore, to find an analogy, we must have recourse to the enveloped regions, the regions of the world. In that world of productions of the human brain appear as independent things, endowed with life and entering into relation both with one another and the human race. So it is in the world of commodities, with the product of men's hands, that I call fetishism, which attaches itself to the products of labor, so as they are produced as commodities, and which therefore is inseparable from the production of commodities. In simpler language, we can all see that money has power in society, but where exactly does it come from? More specifically, how do we Marxists see where the power of money comes from? There are many different opinions on this, the most famous being the religious idea that money is the root of all evil. But of course this doesn't tell us very much. Money has power in society, but where does this power come from? The desire to obtain money is an end in itself. It takes on all things in society: class status, symbol of prestige, and social power. It appears as though money has a power unto itself. Money seems to have a will and consciousness of its own. This phenomenon, where objects have social power or will of their own, is called the fetishism of commodities by Marx. In this context, Marx uses the term fetishism in the original religious meaning. It is the view that inanimate objects hold power, or that these powers are attributed to them. Commodities and money can seem to have the same power, but really they are only expressions of our own labor. People produce things in a workplace. People directly interact with one another during their production. The organizations of work, the division of labor, are direct social relations between people. When something needs to change in the process, someone from management walks in and tells everybody what's up, or a collective decision is made. This is different in the market. Instead, there are indirect social relations that are the exchanges of commodities. The things that happen in the marketplace feed back to the act of production itself, i.e., make more, make less, or make them differently. Farmers, people who make cars, people who make furniture interact through the marketplace when their products meet each other. We see only the exchanges of value. These social relations are indirect, as they interact only through their commodities. In a single factory, we have material relations. In the market, those material relations are replaced with social relations between things. This process of social relations between people manifesting as relations between things, Marx called reification. When we purchase a commodity, we are experiencing a commodity, not the social relation behind it. Even if we know that there is a network of social relations, there we still do not experience them. In this, we understand that every economic relation is experienced via a commodity. This act of exchanging all things in society, where money gets its power from. The value of all commodities is expressed through money. The social labor that goes into the production of a certain commodity is expressed as a particular amount of money. As a result of this process of manufacturing exchange, money itself becomes the source of social power. The act of exchange gives it this power because it is an expression of social relations. The market is a collection of social relations. The more money you have, the more social power you have. Thus, we see the source of the power money has. The true difference here between Kaiser and Marx is that Marx recognizes the reality of where this power comes from. He shows how objects may appear to have power over people, but in truth, it comes from the relations behind them, the relations of production and distribution of commodities. Objects in themselves cannot make people lazy. They cannot pervert their thinking and create a decadent society. Ancient Roman slave-holding society didn't become decadent, degenerating society because of the commodities they had. It became that way through the social relations that they lived in, because they were freed from work by slavery. They had time to indulge in philosophy, arts, and pleasures, particularly pleasures, unrestrained. Without an adequate understanding of these social relations, they fell to petty desires and selfish ambitions that eventually weakened their empire. This society was experienced much differently by the slaves. They encountered no such relations between each other. They experienced the repression end of the relationship of their owners. As a result, they ended up with a different but partially influenced culture. The degeneracy came from the top down, precisely due to the nature of those social relations. Kaiser firmly believes that reliance on technology weakens humans, and was responsible for the Great War. As such, his legion is mostly made of low-tech organization, relying on numbers, physical fitness, and discipline to achieve their objectives. A typical legionary will wear armor, mimicking the Roman lorica hamata or lorica segmentata, usually created from pre-war sports gear, mostly, if not exclusively, football gear, armored with metal plates including a helmet worn over the tunic. In combat, they either use simple firearms, typically revolvers or lever-action rifles, power fists, or melee weapons, in the form of machetes and throwing spears crafted from scavenged materials that mimic ancient Roman short sword, gladius, or the javelin, pilum. However, it is incorrect to treat their technology as primitive. As simple as regular combat gear is, the Legion is capable of erecting large fortifications out of scrap, example the Fortification Hill encampment, and mass-producing standardized weapons and armor for his footmen. In fact, the armor and weapons of higher-ranking soldiers compares favorably with the NCR. In major battles, centurions will use rather advanced weaponry such as anti-material rifles, marksman carbines, and super sledges. The personal guards of the Kaiser themselves are equipped with high-tech ballistic fists to complement their martial prowess. While no Legion member wields energy weapons, they show an interest in purchasing them from the Van Graffs. The Legion is also never shown using power armor, though pieces of what appear to be T-45D power armor are used in Centurion armor. Oddly enough, the Legion has huge amounts of stealth boys. These stealth boys are never seen used by Legion soldiers in the Mojave, but they are used by the Legion at dry wells and the Legion marked men at the Divide. A high reputation with the Legion will lead to a steady cache of stealth boys for the courier. The only mentioned opposition to military technology is combat robots. Kaiser dislikes the thought of having robots win a war fought by men. Because of this, he tells the courier to destroy House's Securitron army, even if the courier offers to use the technology to destroy the NCR. He has no problem with Lucius trying to repair Howitzer for the purpose of suppressing the 1st Recon and NCR veteran Ranger snipers. They occupy the Helios 1 station if the player desires to activate the Archimedes 1. Fantastic joins the Legion as the overseer of the power plant in the comment, "Hey man, when in Rome." The Legion appears to use radios as shown at Cottonwood Cove headquarters, but overall opts for devices that use no power. The Legion does not need or truly desire power sources like the NCR, but at no point oppose its usage as they do with chems, alcohol, and combat robots. The Legion is overall a very neo-Luddite organization, hoping to return to the days of the Roman Empire, and this idea conflicts with using old world technology. While the Legion uses technology when appropriate, there is no interest in the pursuit of technology in any aspect, like there is with most other major factions in the wasteland. The weakness here of Kaiser is his refusal to use technology which can be of great service to his cause. Technology has been nothing but a benefit to humanity. It is the social relations behind the production and distribution of technology, commodities, that has had a negative effect. The tactical use of technology in war is absolutely undeniable. The samurai may have had their honor and moral objections to the use of firearms, but it was those who did that succeeded. While Kaiser may have an interesting take on the motorized chariot, it would be of little effectiveness against a vertibird. Instead of using such tactical advantages, Kaiser has relied upon an army of slaves to throw at the enemy in unending waves. Kaiser, unlike Stalin, limits his military effectiveness. Stalin, by contrast, was known to have pushed for industrialization as quickly as possible to confront the technologically advanced development of the Nazis as far as 10 years before the war took place. The scientific social approach of Marxism has once again proven itself superior, although Kaiser must have had some understanding of this, considering he did reserve some technology for himself and his personal health. An autodoc can be found in his personal tent. So we see how the Marxist and the Kaiser's view of materialism are completely different, despite the accusations of the bourgeoisie. We understand why money and materialism works the way it does. Kaiser's notions, on the other hand, are quite unscientific. There is something interesting I noticed about the way in which the Kaiser speaks. It is the fact that he speaks in a Hegelian dialectical way. It appears that he must have some form of education in order for him to do this. Of course, he did receive some education from the followers of the Apocalypse. This is one of the reasons I'm convinced that Kaiser's Legion is supposed to be an analogy for the Soviet Union. True, Marxism doesn't use Hegelian dialectics, but instead dialectical materialism, but I don't think it matters here in the game. At the very least, it appears Kaiser approaches life, combat, and social forces using Hegel's thesis and antithesis.
My conquest of the Mojave will be a glorious triumph, marking the transition of the Legion from a basically nomadic tribe to a genuine empire. Just as my namesake campaigned in Gaul before he crossed the Rubicon, so have I campaigned and will cross the Colorado. Thesis and antithesis. The Colorado River is my Rubicon. The NCR Council will be eradicated, but the new synthesis will change the Legion as well.
It is even openly stated that he uses it. He regards the NCR only as an extension of the corruption that existed during the Old World, and that it is ultimately doomed to repeat the same mistakes. He sees it in similar attributes associated with the Roman Republic before Julius Caesar took power. Extensive bureaucracy, corruption, senatorial infighting, and filled with people driven solely by greed and personal gain. It exists as the antithesis to the Legion, as a catalyst for change that only a confrontation with it can bring. A clash he sees as an inevitable product of Hegelian dialectics. The conflict is a vital one, not only for the future of his Legion strategically, but also philosophically. The NCR is the first of his enemies, which he is truly ideologically opposed, and the first that can truly test the strength of his Legion, as well as his philosophy. But what exactly is Hegelian dialectics? Dialectics, also dialectics in the dialectical method, is a method of argument for resolving disagreement that has been central to European and Indian philosophy since antiquity. The word dialectic originated in ancient Greece and was made popular by Plato in the Socratic dialogues. The dialectical method is discourse between two or more people holding different points of view about a subject who wish to establish the truth of the matter, guided by reasoned arguments. Hegelian dialectic usually presented in a threefold manner as comprising three dialectical stages of development: a thesis giving rise to its reaction and antithesis, which contradicts or negates the thesis, and the tension between the two being resolved by means of a synthesis. Although this model is often named after Hegel, he himself never used that specific formulation. Hegel ascribed that terminology to Kant. Carrying on Kant's work, he greatly elaborated on the synthesis model and popularized it. On the other hand, Hegel did use a three-value logical model that is very similar to the antithesis model, but Hegel's most usual terms were abstract, negative, concrete. Hegel used this writing model as a backbone to accompany his points in many of his works. In The Logic, for instance, Hegel describes a dialectic of existence. First, existence must be posited as pure being, but pure being, upon examination, is found to be indistinguishable from nothing. When it is realized that what is coming into being is at the same time also returning to nothing, in life, for example, one's own living is also a dying, both being and nothing are united as becoming. Hegel claimed to proceed by making implicit contradictions explicit. Each stage of the process is the product of the contradictions inherent or implicit in the preceding stage. For Hegel, the whole of history is one tremendous dialectic, major stages of which chart a progression from self-alienation as slavery to self-unification, and realization as the rational constitutional state of free and equal citizens. The Hegelian dialectic cannot be mechanically applied for any chosen thesis. Critics argue that the selection of any antithesis other than the logical negation of the thesis is subjective. Then, if the logical negation is used as the antithesis, there is no rigorous way to derive a synthesis. In practice, when an antithesis is selected to suit the user's subjective purpose, the resulting contradictions are rhetorical, not logical. And the resulting synthesis is not rigorously defensible against a multitude of other possible syntheses. The problem with the antithesis synthesis model is that it implies that contradictions or negations come from the outside of things. Hegel's point is that they are inherent in and internal to things. This conception of dialectics derives ultimately from Heraclitus. Hegel has outlined that the purpose of dialectics is to study things in their own being and movement, and thus to demonstrate the finitude of the partial categories of understanding. One important dialectical principle for Hegel is the transition from quantity to quality, which he uses the term measure. The measure is the qualitative quantum. The quantum is the existence of quality. The identity between quantity and quality, which is found in measure, is at first only implicit and not yet explicitly realized. In other words, these two categories which unite in measure each claim an independent authority. On the one hand, the quantitative features of existence may be altered without affecting its quality. On the other hand, this increase and diminution, immaterial though it may be, has its limits, by exceeding which the quality suffers change. But if the quantity presents in measure exceeds a certain limit, the quality corresponding to it is also put in abeyance. This, however, is not a negation of quality altogether, but only of this definite quality, the place of which is at once occupied by another. This process of measure, which appears alternatively as a measure change in quantity and then a sudden revulsion of quantity into quality, may be envisioned under a figure of a knotted line. Another important principle for Hegel is the negation of the negation, which he also uses the term sublation. Something is only what is in its relation to another, but by the negation of the negation, this is something that incorporates the other into itself. The dialectical movement involves two moments that negate each other, something and its other. As a result of the negation, something becomes its other. This other is itself something. Therefore, it likewise becomes another, and so on ad infinitum. Something in its passage into the other only joins with itself if it is self-related. In becoming, there are two moments, coming to be and ceasing to be. By sublation, i.e. the negation of the negation, passes being over into nothing. It ceases to be, but something new shows up, is becoming to be. What is sublated on the one hand ceases to be and is put to an end, but on the other hand, it is preserved and maintained. In dialectics, a totality transformation itself, it is self-related, then self-forgetful, relieving the original tension. So what is the difference here between Marx's dialectical materialism and Hegel's dialectic? The laws of dialectics were already worked out in detail by Hegel, in whose writings, however, they appear in a mystified idealist form. It was Marx and Engels who first gave dialectics a scientific, that is to say, materialist basis. Hegel wrote before Darwin and before Marx wrote Trotsky. Thanks to the powerful impulse given to thought by the French Revolution, Hegel anticipated the general movement of science, but because it was only an anticipation, although by a genius, it received from Hegel an idealistic character. Hegel operated with ideological shadows as the ultimate reality. Marx demonstrated that the movement of those ideological shadows reflected nothing but the movement of material bodies. In the writings of Hegel, there are many striking examples of the law of dialectics drawn from history and nature, but Hegel's idealism necessarily gave his dialectics a highly abstract and arbitrary character. In order to make dialectics serve the absolute idea, Hegel was forced to impose a schema upon nature and society in flat contradiction to the dialectical method itself, which demands that we derive the laws of a given phenomenon from a scrupulously objective study of the subject matter, as Marx did in his Capital. Thus, far from being a mere regurgitation of Hegel's idealist dialectic arbitrarily foisted on history and society, as his critics often assert, Marx's method was precisely the opposite, as he himself explains. My dialectical method, wrote Marx, is not only different from the Hegelian, but is its direct opposite. To Hegel, the life process of the human brain, i.e. processes of thinking, which are under the name of the idea, he even transforms into an independent subject, is the demagogios of the real world, and the real world is only the external phenomenal form of the idea. With me, on the contrary, the idea is nothing else than the material world reflected by the human mind and translated into forms of thought. The Kaiser's Legion is based upon the idea of a unified humanity under the banner of the bull. I believe this is meant to be an analogy of the communist idea of all peoples being united. The NCR has its own idea of humanity united, all tied together under a republic based on mercantile exchange, which they directly claim. I think this is a very clear analogy for capitalism versus communism. The meaning is supposed to scare people. The alternative to the market is the turning of people into mindless religious zealots, drones who can't think for themselves. Nothing could be further from the truth. Marxism has a different idea of individuality, one not readily available in capitalism. Again, we should make the comparison of the unity of humanity under the Kaiser and Marxism. How does the Kaiser see it? We should refresh ourselves with what we saw before. Kaiser greatly dislikes democratic societies, especially the NCR, because of the glorification of the wealthy over the worthy. In addition, Kaiser greatly dislikes sectionalism and consumerism, mainly because he believes that they convert human beings into animals, or simple beings that live only for the sake of surviving. Kaiser believes that it is his opportunity and destiny to unite all of mankind under one banner, ushering in an age where each human is judged by their merit and is subsequently given power according to that perceived virtue. This way of thinking exemplifies the differences between the NCR and Kaiser's Legion. The NCR believes that basic democratic mercantilism will eventually bring peace to the wastes. While the greedy may rule now, when peace and stability inevitably arrive, the populace will eventually acquire a greater power through reform. Kaiser, however, sees this as a curse, not a blessing. In his mind, it will allow humans, the animals, to be preyed upon by the greedy, while the NCR uses their significant wealth to fund research and to improve the average life expectancy of its citizens. The Legion believes that longer lives come at the cost of other humans, resources, and purpose. People who blindly try to extend their lives should instead attempt to live without the fear of death hanging over them. This is why the Legion refuses to use medical sciences, except in rare cases. Given how little common ground exists between the ideologies of the NCR and Legion, these factions will undoubtedly contest each other until one of them is defeated. The Legion society is largely hierarchical. Anyone outside its ranks is considered to be dissolute, lacking in morals, while those that are both outside of it and hostile, usually the NCR and its subjects, are called proletariats, slightly more dissolute. Freshly caught humans are called captures and are considered the lowest of the low. Their only right is to be tested as a slave. If they do not meet the requirements, they are immediately disposed of. Slaves are one step above captures and consist of captured humans unfit for combat duty as a legionary. They are expected to adhere to the virtues of a slave, honestas, industrias, prudentia, honesty, industry, and prudence, and follow their master's orders without questions. They are given new name and wear rags with a light red X painted over their chest. During the capture stage, slaves seem to be forced to wear slave collars. Later, when they have been broken in and transported deeper into Legion territory, the collars are removed, as seen with the slaves at Fortification Hill. Children of slaves are taken from their parents after birth and placed in the care of the priestess, who raised them in keeping with Kaiser's doctrines. Physically fit males are chosen to serve as legionaries. Legionaries are the main fighting force of the Legion and form the bulk of its society, composed of capable men conscripted into service. Legionaries are expected to demonstrate the apex of Roman values. Advancement in rank is purely merit-based. If a legionary proves himself in combat, he will be promoted. If he doesn't, he will be lucky to escape with his life. As we can see, while the Legion sees humanity united under the same banner, they do not see people as being equal. There is no Orwellian, Randian boogeyman of everyone being equal and trampling the virtuous. Quite the opposite, in fact. It believes that people with supposed greater virtues should be placed above other people. Isn't this the real philosophy of capitalism and its ardent supporters? Don't they believe that they are entirely unique and different from everyone else, and that is the trampling of their psyche to see one another as equals? Do they not drone on incessantly about how supposedly economically lesser people are a drain on them? Do they not constantly tout their own self-superiority like a self-conscious teenager? Of course, they ignore the bold fact that they stand on top of the global pyramid of imperialism, which is a parasite that drains the wealth, resources, and human potential from the world's majority. The people who really work hard, people who risk death, disease, live in ridiculous poverty, all for the luxury consumer benefit of some self-important first world crybaby who needs to run around telling people how great they are because they, quote-unquote, work so hard. Marxism rejects their view and their false view of communism. We see all societies as a collection of contradictions between peoples and countries. There is a contradiction between men and women, between first and third world, classes, and yes, even between races. These differences arise from all manner of influences. They may be material differences from land, even social constructs. The goal of communism is not to erase the individual, but to erase the contradiction between groups that cause antagonisms. We do not wish to erase individuals, only the hostilities. Peace comes from the ending of conflict, not the erasure of people. Their false view of us is portrayed in the Kaiser's Legion. Kaiser formed his legion out of tribes that had either been conquered or had chosen to capitulate to avoid total destruction. He chose the concept of the Roman Empire to model the legion after because of its parallels to what he considered the status quo of the post-apocalyptic world. Ideologically, the Roman Empire was also appealing to him for its ability to assimilate those it conquered. The destruction of the tribal identities, a key goal to the legion's long-term strategy of unification. He intended to erase the individual identities and replace them with a single monolithic culture, the Legion, where individuals have no value outside of what they offer the greater whole, long-term stability at all costs. By 2250, the Kaiser had declared himself the son of Mars, the Roman god of war, and 5 years later he established his first capital in the ruins of Flagstaff, Arizona. Together with the Malpais Legat, he used the power base they established to attack and assimilate more tribes into the Legion. For decades, they fought and absorbed inferior tribes, erasing tribal identities and shaping them into a massive, fanatically loyal army that, in Kaiser's eyes, embodies the concept of a perfect post-nuclear society. By 2274, he had conquered most of the tribes of northern Arizona, southwestern Colorado, and western New Mexico, and southwestern Utah, and became known as the conqueror of the 86 tribes, whose legion had never met any serious defeat until their confrontation with the new California Republic. In order to build his coming empire, Kaiser instituted all kinds of policies aimed at destroying cultural and tribal identities. Women from one tribe were forced to bear children from a man of another tribe in order to destroy their family and tribal roots. Essentially, this is what the bourgeois and their believers of their hollow propaganda think the Soviet Union and Marxism is like. They think the evil communists will want to take away everything we think and feel and replace it with quotations and cults of personality, erasing all individualism. This is false. Marxism celebrates individualism, and we merely have a different way of defining it. This is how Marx outlines, demonstrating how collectivism and individualism are not mutually exclusive. The transformation through the division of labor, of personal powers, relationships, into material powers, cannot be dispelled by dismissing the general idea of it from one's mind, but can only be absorbed by the individuals, again, subjecting these material powers to themselves, and abolishing the division of labor. This is not possible without the community. Only in community with others has each individual the means of cultivating his gifts in all directions. Only in the community, therefore, is personal freedom possible. In the previous substitutes for the community, in the state, etc., personal freedom has existed only for individuals who develop within the relationships of the ruling class, and insofar as there were individuals of this class, the illusory community, in which individuals have, till now, combined always took on an independent existence in relation to them, and was at the same time, since it was the combination of one class over another, not only a complete illusory community, but a new fetter as well. In a real community, the individuals obtain their freedom in and through their association. Individuals have always built themselves, but naturally on themselves within their given historical conditions and relationships, not on the pure individual in the sense of the ideologist, but in the course of historical evolution and precisely through the inevitable fact that within the division of labor, social relations take an independent existence. There appears a division within the life of each individual insofar as it personal and insofar as it's determined by some branch of labor and the conditions pertaining to it. We do not mean it to be understood from that. For example, the rentier, the capitalist, etc. cease to be persons, but their personality is conditioned and determined by quite definite class relationships, and the division appears only in their opposite to another class, and for themselves only when they go bankrupt. In the estate, and even more in the tribe, this is as yet concealed. For instance, a nobleman always remains a nobleman, a commoner always a commoner, apart from his other relationships, a quality inseparable from his individuality. The division between the personal and the class individual, the accidental nature of the conditions of life for the individual, appears only with the emergence of the class, which is itself a product of the bourgeoisie. This accidental character is only engendered and developed by the competition and the struggle of individuals among themselves. Thus, in imagination, individuals seem freer under the dominance of the bourgeoisie than before, because their conditions of life seem accidental. In reality, of course, they are less free, because they are more subjected to the violence of things. The difference from the estate comes out particularly in the antagonism between the bourgeois and the proletariat. When the estate of the urban burghers, the corporations, etc., emerged in opposition to the landed nobility, their condition of existence moved property and craft labor, which had already existed latently before their separation from feudal ties, appeared as something positive, which was asserted against feudal landed property, and therefore in its own way at first took on a feudal form. Certainly, the refugee serfs treated their previous servitude as something accidental to their personality, but here they were only doing what every class that is freeing itself from a fetter does. And they do not free themselves as a class, but separately. Moreover, they did not rise above the system of estates, but only formed a new estate, retaining their previous mode of labor even by freeing it from its earlier fetters, which no longer corresponded to the development already attained. For the proletarians, on the other hand, the condition of their existence, labor, and with it all the conditions of existence governing modern society have become something accidental, something over which they, as separate individuals, have no control, and over which no social organization can give them control. The contradiction between the individuality of each separate proletarian and labor, the conditions of life forced upon them, becomes evident to himself, for he is sacrificed from youth upwards. Within his own class, he has no chance of arriving at the conditions which would place him in the other class. Thus, while the refugee serfs only wish to be free to develop and assert these conditions of existence, they were already there, and hence, in the end, only arrived at free labor. The proletarians, if they are to assert themselves as individuals, will have to abolish the very conditions of their existence hitherto, which has moreover been that of all society up to the present, namely labor. Thus they find themselves directly opposed to the form in which hitherto the individuals of which society consists have given themselves collective expression, that is, the state. In order therefore to assert themselves as individuals, they must overthrow the state. It follows from all we have been saying up till now that the communal relationship into which the individuals of a class entered, and which was determined by their common interests against a third party, was always a community to which these individuals belonged only as average individuals, only insofar as they lived within the conditions of existence of their class, a relationship in which they participated not as individuals, but as members of a class, with the community of revolutionary proletarians, on the other hand, who take their conditions of existence and those of all members of society under their control. It is just the reverse. It is as individuals that the individuals participate in it. It is just this combination of individuals, assuming the advanced stage of modern productive forces, of course, which puts the conditions of the free development and movement of individuals under their control, conditions which were previously abandoned to chance and had won an independent existence over against the separate individuals just because of their separation as individuals, and because of the necessity of their combination, which has been determined by the division of labor, and through their separation had become a bond alien to them. Combination up till now, by no means an arbitrary one, such as it expounded, for example, in the contract social, but a necessary one, was an agreement upon these conditions, within which the individuals were free to enjoy the freaks of fortune. Compare, example, the formation of the North American state and the South American republics. This right to the undisturbed enjoyment within certain conditions of fortuity and chance up till now has been called personal freedom. These conditions of existence are, of course, only the productive forces and the forms of intercourse at any particular time. To the bourgeois mindset, individuality can only be expressed in the market. A person is defined by their possessions, and what they buy is who they are. This is all we wish to alter. A person is more than the things they own. Their self-expression is greater than the clothes, or in their case, fedora, they purchase. They run out with their separate subcultures to various stores and buy the same items of clothing, swearing that they're all unique and free thinkers. A human being, in our view, is much more than a collection of commodities. It is in fact capitalism that wishes to erase the individual and replace him with a product of purchase. They put up the false capitalist apologist dichotomy of collectivism versus individualism, where both concepts are considered to be irreconcilable and in contradiction with each other, where you either do something that benefits the individual or something that benefits the collective, and thus we cannot have a system that seeks to benefit both simultaneously. The Legion society is largely hierarchical. Anyone outside its ranks is considered to be dissolute, lacking in morals, while those and both outside it and hostile, usually the NCR and its subjects, are called prolificates, slightly more dissolute. Freshly caught humans are called captures and considered the lowest of the low. Their only right is to be tested as a slave. If they do not meet these requirements, they are immediately disposed of. Slaves are one step above captures, and consist of captured humans unfit for combat duty as a legionary. They are expected to adhere to the virtues of a slave, honestas industriis prudentia, honesty, industry, and prudence, and follow their master's orders without questions. They are given a new name, wear rags with a light red X painted over their chest. During the capture stage, slaves seem to be forced to wear slave collars. When they have been broken in and transported deeper into Legion territory, the collars are removed, as seen with the slaves of Fortification Hill. Children of slaves are taken from their parents after birth and placed in the care of the priestess, who raised them in keeping with the Kaiser's doctrine. Physically fit males are chosen to serve as legionnaires. Legionnaires are the main fighting force of the Legion and form the bulk of its society. Composed of capable men conscripted into service, legionnaires are expected to demonstrate the apex of Roman values. Advancement in rank is purely merit-based. If a legionary proves himself in combat, he will be promoted. If he doesn't, he'll be lucky to escape with his life. Breeding issues are pretty huge in cultures that took a big step back from infant mortality progress made in the last 100 to 200 years. Prior to the last few centuries, infant mortality was often around 50%-ish. Child mortality prior to age 12 was about 60%. Those are pretty awful odds of reaching adulthood. Remember that Kaiser's Legion is basically a roving army that continually breaks down and absorbs tribes that it conquers. That can only go on for so long, and legionnaires who are indoctrinated from birth are even more loyal than adolescents who are integrated. Breeding new generations of legionnaires is vital for the Legion's continued existence. Even though breeding is incredibly important in the Legion, there isn't any concept of family outside the Legion structure. All of the places where the player encounters the Legion are forward camps where direct military service is given the most weight, and is of the most immediate importance. Because only males are involved in that service, they look down upon females, even though that's incredibly short-sighted. The additional Legion locations would have a more traveling non-Legion residents of Legion territories. The fort in Cottonwood Cove made sense as heavy military outposts, where the vast majority of the population consisted of soldiers and slaves. The other locations would have had more civilians. It's not accurate to think of them as citizens of the Legion. The Legion is purely military, but as non-tribal people who live in areas under Legion control. While Kaiser intentionally enslaves NCR and Mojave residents in the war zone, most of the enslavement that happens in the East happens to tribals. As Raoul indicates, there are non-tribal communities that came under Legion control a long time ago. The additional locations would have shown what life is like for those people. The general undertone would have been what you would expect from life under a stable military dictatorship facing no internal resistance. The majority of people enjoy safe and productive lives, no more than they had prior to the Legion's arrival, but have no freedoms, rights, or say in what happens in their communities. Water and power flow consistently, food is adequate, travel is safe, and occasionally someone steps afoul of a legionary and gets his or her head cut off. If the Legion tells someone to do something, they only ask once, even if that means an entire community has to pick up and move 50 miles away. Corruption within the Legion is rare, and Kaiser deals with it harshly, even by Legion standards. In short, residents of Legion territories aren't really citizens and aren't really slaves, but they're also not free. People who keep their mouths shut and go about their business and nod at the rare requests the Legion makes of them, they can live very well. Many of them don't care at all that they don't have any say what happens around them, mostly because they felt they never had a say in it before the Legion came anyway. Throughout Marx's career as a troublemaker for the bourgeois and creating the theory thereof, he spent some time looking at the phenomenon of slavery as a historical period of development. Trade and the use of African slaves to Marx was an essential component to the development of the emerging system of capitalism. It was important not just for the United States, but for industrializing Europe as well. The following quote by Marx sums up his thoughts adequately. Direct slavery is just as much the pivot of bourgeois industry as machinery, credits, etc. Without slavery, you have no cotton. Without cotton, you have no modern industry. It is slavery that has given the colonies their value. It is the colonies that have created world trade. And it is world trade that is the precondition of large-scale industry. Thus, slavery is an economic category of the greatest importance. Without slavery, North America, the roost progressive of countries, would be transformed into a patriarchal country. Wipe out North America from the map of the world, and you will have anarchy, the complete decay of modern commerce and civilization. Cause slavery to disappear, and you will have wiped America off the map of nations. Thus, slavery, because it is an economic category, has always existed among the institutions of the peoples. Modern nations have been able to only disguise slavery in their own countries, but they have imposed it without disguise upon the New World. Marx did not see slavery as a static phenomenon. In fact, it was the dynamic taking on different forms depending on the development of productive forces. We'll use here the most familiar form, that of the southern United States leading up to the Civil War. Slave-holding society is like all class-based societies in that it contained the seeds of its own destruction. In this case, it was a very transparent system of exploitation. The physical taking of social product from the slaves was a constant reminder of who produced what and the corresponding social relations of its production. The American manifestation of slavery was different from those that occurred during the past, giving it a unique character. When writing about it, Marx said the U.S. was a country where bourgeois society did not develop on the foundation of the feudal system, but developed rather from itself, where this society appears not as surviving result of a centuries-old movement, but rather as the starting point of a new movement, where the state, in contrast to all earlier national formations, was from the beginning subordinate to the bourgeois society, to its production, and never could make the pretense of being an end in itself, where finally bourgeois society itself, linking up the productive forces of an old world with the enormous natural terrain of a new one, has developed to hitherto unheard of dimensions, and with unheard freedom of movement has far outstripped all previous work in the conquest of the forces of nature, and where finally even the antithesis of bourgeois society itself appear only as vanishing moments. The connection to the emerging capitalism was quite real. After all, it was heavily relied upon for the cotton industry. There was a degree of slavery in the cotton industry in England. There it introduced child slavery, which was much different. Ironically, the slavery in America lasted longer due to the fact that it used less force to keep it in place. Slavery in America had the breeding of slavery into the very people itself. In England, it was a patriarchal slavery enforced by the family. This was pointed out by Marx and Frederick Engels. Which the cotton industry introduced child slavery in England, it gave in the United States a stimulus to the transformation of the earlier, more or less patriarchal slavery into a system of commercial exploitation. In fact, the veiled slavery of the wage earners in Europe needed for its pedestal slavery pure and simple in the New World. Slavery in the United States of America was based far less on force than on the English cotton industry. In those districts where no cotton was grown, or which, unlike the border states, did not breed slaves for the cotton-growing states, it died out of itself without any force being used, simply because it did not pay. Because the slavery in England was based on patriarchal concepts, it was easy enough to break up with enough demand from the lower classes that were not slaves and could thus make certain demands. Slavery in the U.S. had to be broken up by military force that caused at least 1.5 million casualties. Despite what many people believe, the Civil War was about slavery. At that time of the war, industrial capitalism and financial banking were rising powers in the nation. The rise of our modern capitalism had certain requirements, like the free mobility of labor. Southern plantation slavery could not be allowed to continue as it hindered this need. There were also struggles between competing ruling classes. If one section needed to weaken the other in order for it to grow, then they will end up struggling. We've seen a lesser degree of this during the Obamacare struggle. One group of capitalists would benefit from it while another would suffer. The same, to a greater degree, happened with the Civil War. At that time, the agricultural South, particularly cotton, was the economic engine of the country. The capitalists in industry and banking saw their chance to take over as their power grew alongside industrial technology. Remember, financial capital is tied to industrial production. They know which is more profitable for them, agricultural slavery or industrial production. Only one of these modes of production was going to survive. Industrial production needed a freer mobility of labor, while slavery needed less mobile labor in order for it to work. We now have two ruling class powers locked in an antagonistic contradiction. War was inevitable when the two groups were fighting over class interest and labor power. Caesar's legion uses two old forms of currency, which were also used in Roman times. They are minted by the legion in the form of silver and gold coins, each coin bearing the profile of Caesar. Despite Caesar's poor relations with the other factions in New Vegas, legion currency is still accepted as payment in the Mojave wasteland, owing to the high level of trade with the legion and the safety of its territory for caravans. The exchange rate is 4 bottle caps to 1 denarius, and 100 bottle caps to 1 arius. The denarius, or silver, which bears an image of a younger Caesar on the obverse, and Caesar Joshua Graham Calhoun on the reverse. The inscriptions are in Latin, Caesar Dictator, meaning Dictator Caesar, or Absolute Ruler Caesar on the front, and Magnum Chasma, or Great Abyss, or Great Fissure, on the back, referring to the Grand Canyon. The symbolism is simple. The denarius commemorates young Caesar's journey to the canyon and his first victories as dictator of the tribes. The arius, or the gold coin, which bears the portrait of the older Caesar on one side and the symbol of the 10th Legion, the bull, on the other. The inscriptions in Latin are Aeternit Imperii, meaning for the eternity of the empire, on the front, and Pax per Bellum, meaning peace through war, on the back. Despite Caesar's clear ability to understand contradiction, he doesn't see it in his monetary system. The use of two precious metals in a currency is a contradiction. If both serve as a measure of value, we are left with two different measures of value. This leads only to problems, as the United States has shown in the past. To understand how money operates in a system of commodity production, we must first understand how money is a tool that aids commodity circulation. For commodity exchange to take place, there must be some kind of equivalent possible. The money must be able to represent a particular amount of value in relation to another commodity. This breaks down when there are two measures of value. When two different commodities function as a measure of value, i.e. gold and silver, all commodities will then possess two different price expressions, gold price and silver price. Every change in the value relation of gold to silver causes price disturbances. Having more than one measure of value is an absurdity, a contradiction of the function of money as the measure of value. Whenever an effort has been made to legally make two commodities measures of value, it has always been only one, which has in fact functioned as that measure. In 1903, in several countries, gold and silver were the official coexisting measures of value. However, life has always shown this to be absurd. Like every other commodity, gold and silver are subject to constant fluctuations in value. If both are made legally the same value by law, and if you can make a payment in either metal, then payments would be made in the metal whose value was falling. The other would be sold according to the price of it somewhere else abroad. People will just buy commodities with the metal that has less value, and then just sell off the other metal for more in another market where the price of it is high. In countries at the time where there was a double currency, so-called bimetallism, only one of the commodities actually served as a measure of value, and that is the one whose value was falling. The other, whose value was rising, will measure commodity prices by its own value, not the commodity itself. If gold's price is rising, the value of the gold will serve as price, not the value of the commodity. If gold is really valuable, it will be worth more than the commodity it will be exchanged for. If a coat is worth 10 grams at the price, and the price of gold doubles, then the buyer won't give all 10 grams to the coat. They'll demand to pay only 5. The greater the discrepancy between the value of gold and silver there is, the more obvious the absurdity of bimetallism becomes. If your gold was worth more than your silver, why would you exchange with your gold if in exchange it is worth the same as silver? If the price for a commodity is 10 grams of gold or silver, why would you say give $2 worth of gold when you can give $1 worth of silver if they were considered the same? You wouldn't. You would hoard the gold and trade with silver. This in turn would cause the price of gold to increase because everyone would be seeking it more than they normally would be if it were equal to silver, and they would be hoarding it. For the sake of simplicity in capital, Marx always assumes gold to be the only money commodity. As a matter of fact, gold tended to become the money commodity standard in all capitalist countries. This is something that is completely overlooked and often outright lied about in libertarian literature and Marxist economics. They frequently say that Marx wasn't taking the gold standard into account when he in fact was basing all money on gold. Beyond this, there's not much to say in the way of the economics of Kaiser's Legion. We simply don't have enough information on it to make any kind of determination. All we've seen thus far is basically the military side of his empire.